In the late 1980s, a series of crimes in the Amazonian state of Para, Brazil shocked the nation, yet the cult behind them, known as superior universal alignment, remains virtually unheard of outside South America. In the remote city of Altamira, young boys began disappearing, only for some to later turn up dead in circumstances so gruesome that they seemed almost beyond belief. The perpetrators were not random predators, but members of a bizarre cult following the orders of a self-proclaimed prophetess. Over just a few years, at least 19 boys fell victim to abduction, torture, or murder at the hands of this sect. This is the chilling true story of a UFO cult that turned into a child-killing ring, a tale of prophecy, paranoia, and unfathomable brutality. Superior Universal Alignment was founded around 1981 by an Argentine-born woman named Valentina de Andrade. Charismatic and utterly convinced of her otherworldly mission, Valentina preached an esoteric gospel with a science fiction twist. She claimed that God was a fraud and that Jesus Christ was actually an extraterrestrial being who had once visited Earth. According to Valentina, she herself had been contacted by alien entities who warned of an imminent apocalypse. The only hope of salvation, she said, was for her chosen followers to join her in spreading the aliens' message. If they remained faithful, a spaceship would arrive to rescue them before doomsday. This strange blend of UFO religion and anti-Christian doctrine attracted a small but devoted following, eager to escape a prophesied cataclysm aboard a waiting alien craft. Valentina's teachings, however, had a dark and twisted side. In 1989, she published a book titled God, the Great Scam, which outlined her cult's core belief that children, particularly male children born after 1981, were hindrances to the coming utopia. Watch out for children, the book warned. They are unconscious instruments of the great scam called God and his evil collaborators. It even urged special attention to those born after 1981. In Valentina's eyes, these boys were considered instruments of evil, corrupted by a false god, and thus posed a spiritual threat to humanity's salvation. The logical, if horrifying, extension of this doctrine was that such children needed to be purged from the world. One account later suggested Valentina believed a psychic medium had told her that all boys born after 1981 were literally possessed by the devil, confirming her conviction that they were not truly innocent. To prove their loyalty and spiritual purity, Valentina allegedly demanded that her followers renounce their families, even their own offspring. Cult members were instructed to abandon any children they had, cutting all familial bonds. Only by doing so, preached Valentina, could they be cleansed enough to join her on the alien spaceship to salvation. This extreme mandate severed parents from children and helped create an insular group of devotees who put the cult above all else. Under Valentina's quasi-messianic leadership, Superior Universal Alignment evolved into a tightly controlled sect with an absolutist, apocalyptic worldview. Unfortunately, it was only a matter of time before these fanatical beliefs turned into violent action. What began as eccentric New Age cosmology escalated into real-world horror between 1989 and 1993. In the small city of Altamira, on the edge of the Amazon rainforest, young boys started vanishing under mysterious circumstances. The victims were boys aged 8 to 14, many from poor backgrounds or broken homes, who would disappear off the streets without a trace. Residents grew fearful as one child after another went missing. Then, the bodies began to surface. What authorities discovered sent waves of revulsion through Brazil. The few boys who were found had been subjected to satanic ritual-like torture. Their slight bodies were discovered naked, mutilated, and often castrated, bearing unmistakable signs of prolonged abuse. For example, a 13-year-old victim was found with his eyes gouged out and his hands chopped off after enduring sexual torture. Another 10-year-old boy's corpse showed human bite marks. His genitals had been gruesomely removed, the glans penis cut off, and the scrotum torn out. Several of the dead had burns and puncture wounds, suggesting they were ritually stabbed or burned as part of the torture. In total, at least 6 boys were found murdered in such fashion during those years, while others simply vanished, their bodies never recovered. The fate of those missing remains unknown, but it is presumed they met similarly terrible ends. The press would later report that the cult's killing spree claimed around 19 young victims in all. A few victims miraculously survived, offering haunting testimonies of what had happened to them. In August 1989, a boy only 8 years old was found wandering after an abduction, dazed, bleeding, and in shock, with injuries indicating he had been sexually abused and mutilated. Another boy, age 10, turned up alive after being kidnapped and drugged. He awoke in agony, bleeding between his legs from a crude castration, but managed to get help and ultimately underwent dozens of surgeries for genital reconstruction. These survivors described being lured by strange men, knocked unconscious with chemicals, and then subjected to nightmarish abuse while in captivity. They had been left for dead, yet lived, and were able to give investigators crucial details of the satanic rites being practiced. The brutality inflicted on the children was almost beyond comprehension, and it fueled rampant speculation about the culprits' motives. According to later investigations, the cult members believed that by sacrificing these boys, the instruments of evil, they were doing God's work, or rather thwarting a false god, and paving the way for their own salvation. In cult doctrine, exterminating boys born after 1981 was a necessary payment to the cosmic beings who would save the faithful. In other words, these murders were seen as ritual offerings. Local authorities initially assumed they were dealing with a satanic black magic ring, given the occult aspects, the mutilations and apparent ritual pattern of the crimes. Indeed, one witness later told of sect members holding black masses, sinister ceremonies where prayers were offered to a god of darkness and children were denounced as evil pawns of Satan. The reality may have been a twisted mix of both, a UFO doomsday cult that had embraced blood sacrifice, rationalizing it as a means to gain spiritual power, or perhaps earthly riches, through dark occult forces. Chilling rumors also spread about what was done with the boys' body parts. The surgical precision of the castrations led police at one point to suspect an organ trafficking gang, possibly harvesting organs to sell on the black market. One survivor, Wanderlei Pinheiro, recounted that his captors spoke of removing organs from some victims, and indeed, some of the murdered boys had internal organs missing. There were even whispers, never proven, that the cultists cannibalized parts of their victims during ceremonies, which, if true, would explain why they were dubbed the Child Eaters cult. While cannibalism was never confirmed by investigators, the very suggestion amplified the atmosphere of horror around the case. By the early 1990s, parents in Altamira were living in terror, and the crimes were front-page news across Brazil. A dedicated police task force was formed to hunt down what they now realized was not a lone serial killer, but a coordinated group of killers driven by cultic fanaticism. Equally shocking was who eventually emerged as suspects. This was not a ragtag band of devil-worshipping teenagers or a deranged drifter, though one itinerant man was wrongfully arrested early on. The true perpetrators turned out to be a shadowy cabal of well-respected citizens, among them 2 local doctors, a wealthy landowner, and a former police officer. These men were educated, influential, and outwardly upstanding members of the community, hardly the profile one might expect for child-torturing cultists. Yet according to witness testimonies and later court indictments, all of them were devotees of Valentina de Andrade's teachings. They had become firm believers that eliminating evil young boys would bring them spiritual rewards, and perhaps material prosperity as well. Under the spell of Valentina's creed, this unlikely collection of professionals formed the inner circle of the cult's death squad. They plotted and carried out the abductions and mutilation murders methodically, even using their medical skills to perform the castrations with care, lending credence to the theory that the crimes had a clinical, ritual purpose. Eyewitnesses later described secret meetings where sect members performed occult rituals and celebrated their vile acts as holy duties. In one account, a witness managed to infiltrate a gathering at Dr. Anicio Ferreira de Sousa's residence in 1991 and saw Valentina de Andrade herself present, presiding over what was described as a satanic cult ceremony. The witness claimed participants were chanting and appeared entranced, convinced that by obeying Valentina's command to purge the boys, they were fulfilling a divine mandate. By 1993, the pattern of atrocities had become undeniable, and the authorities were under immense pressure to crack the case. What unfolded next was a dramatic pursuit of justice that would ultimately bring some of the culprits to account, but leave the cult's infamous leader surprisingly unscathed. The investigation into the Altamira child murders was long, fraught, and not without missteps. For years, the crimes went unsolved as local police failed to connect the dots. Initial inquiries chased false leads, including the arrest of a drifter and theories about organ traffickers. But these went nowhere when the disappearances and killings continued unabated. The breakthrough came when survivors and witnesses started sharing consistent details that pointed to an organized group. In 1993, acting on new testimony, police reopened the case and honed in on the Superior Universal Alignment sect. Investigators discovered that several prominent men in Altamira were indeed affiliated with Valentina de Andrade's cult. The two doctors, Dr. Anicio Ferreira de Sousa and Dr. Cesio Brandão, had both moved to Altamira around 1990, not coincidentally, just before the murders escalated. Their medical expertise suddenly cast the earlier surgical mutilations in a sinister light. In a series of raids and interrogations, authorities gathered evidence and witness statements tying these men and a few accomplices to the crimes. By late 1993, 7 individuals were formally indicted for the Altamira atrocities, including Dr. de Sousa, Dr. Brandão, a businessman named Amelton Gomes, and his father Jose, who was suspected of financing or arranging the rites, 2 former military police officers who acted as enforcers, and Valentina de Andrade as the sect's intellectual author. The prosecution alleged that Valentina's indoctrination had directly inspired the others to commit the kidnappings and murders, essentially making her the mastermind, even if she was not physically present at the crime scenes. The case was built largely on witness testimony and circumstantial evidence. Disturbingly, basic forensic work had been neglected during the years of fear. For instance, no autopsies were done on some of the victims, and crime scenes weren't properly preserved. Nonetheless, the sheer consistency of the survivor accounts and multiple witnesses placing the accused at occult gatherings provided a compelling narrative of guilt. Due to the heinous nature of the charges, the trial was set before a jury and became a media sensation in Brazil. However, justice moved slowly. Legal delays and maneuvering meant that the trial did not actually commence until almost a decade after the last murders, in the early 2000s. Valentina de Andrade, who had left Altamira and was living elsewhere in Brazil, was arrested and brought to trial alongside several of her alleged followers. In a dramatic courtroom showdown that lasted 17 days in 2003, prosecutors laid out the grim details of the cult's activities before horrified onlookers. They presented the sect as a pseudo-religious criminal conspiracy, a group of otherwise ordinary men who tortured children at the bidding of a fanatical guru. Families of the victims sat in the courtroom bearing photos of their lost boys, demanding justice. In the end, the jury delivered a split verdict. 4 of the male defendants were found guilty, convicted for their roles in the ritualistic killings and mutilations. The 2 doctors, in particular, were held responsible for performing the cruel surgeries on the boys. They and the others received harsh prison sentences, ranging from 35 to 77 years behind bars. As the verdicts were read, there was a sense that at least some accountability had been achieved for the long-suffering families of Altamira. Yet, in a jaw-dropping twist, the cult's leader, Valentina de Andrade, was acquitted of all charges. By a jury vote of 6-1, Valentina was cleared, prompting outrage and disbelief from the public. The 72-year-old cult founder even fainted in the courtroom upon hearing the words "not guilty," as the victims' relatives erupted in anger. How could the alleged architect of such heinous crimes walk free? The answer lay in reasonable doubt. The case against Valentina was largely circumstantial. She had not been in Altamira at the time of the murders, In fact, her defense team produced official documents showing that Valentina was in another state, Parana, in southern Brazil, during the key periods of 1989-1993. Valentina also took great pains to distance herself from the actions of her followers. She claimed that if some of her erstwhile disciples committed atrocities, they did so without her knowledge or permission. The prosecution's most damning piece of evidence, a creepy home video seized from Valentina's property, turned out to be a double-edged sword. In the footage, Valentina appeared to be in a trance and seemed to mutter something like, "Kill little children," which investigators took as an incriminating exhortation. However, defense experts argued that her words were misunderstood or mistranslated. According to them, she actually said something far more innocuous. The phrasing was debated, with one analysis suggesting she said, "There are more experienced little children instead." Because of this ambiguity, the judge excluded the video from evidence. With no direct proof that Valentina ordered the murders, only the testimony of witnesses who placed her at cult meetings, the jury decided there was insufficient evidence to convict her. Valentina de Andrade was acquitted, escaping punishment even as her disciples went to prison. Prosecutors vowed to appeal Valentina's acquittal, and the outcome was widely criticized. But under Brazil's legal system, overturning a jury acquittal is extremely difficult. In practice, Valentina walked out of the courtroom a free woman. The families of the dead boys were devastated. To them, it seemed that the mastermind had gotten away with murder. May Valentina, as some followers called her, had effectively outsmarted earthly justice. In the years since the trial, the Altamira child murders case has remained a disturbing enigma. The 4 convicted cult members continue to serve lengthy prison sentences, barring any successful appeals, and thus have faced some reckoning for their crimes. The sordid saga left a lasting scar on the city of Altamira, a place now infamous for one of the most horrific cult crimes in Latin American history. The name, Superior Universal Alignment, is reviled in Para to this day, and the case is often cited in Brazil as a cautionary tale of cult fanaticism gone mad. Astonishingly, Valentina de Andrade lived on in freedom, maintaining her innocence and even continuing to espouse her bizarre teachings. Now an elderly woman, born in 1931, she has never accepted any blame for what happened in Altamira. In interviews and statements after the trial, Valentina insisted that she was a victim of prejudice and that her only mission was to spread cosmic enlightenment. By all accounts, she kept leading the Superior Universal Alignment cult, or what was left of it, attracting new followers in other parts of Brazil and Argentina with the same outlandish promises of alien salvation. Those who still believe in her apparently ignore or rationalize the events of Altamira as either false accusations or misguided acts by rogue members. Incredibly, the cult endures, albeit on the fringes, with Valentina revered by her devotees as a prophet who escaped a government conspiracy against her. As one observer noted bitterly, Valentina was never imprisoned because others did the dirty work for her, allowing the cult leader to evade responsibility while enjoying the continued adulation of her sect. Beyond Brazil, however, the story of Superior Universal Alignment has remained strangely obscure. Unlike other notorious cults, such as Jonestown or the Manson family, this case received relatively little coverage in the Western media after the initial headlines faded. Language barriers and the sheer ghastliness of the crimes likely played a role in limiting its international exposure. No high-profile documentaries or dramatizations have ever tackled the Altamira cult murders, and outside of South America, the case is known mostly to dedicated true crime aficionados. In recent years, a few podcasts and online articles have recounted the basics of the story, often expressing shock that such an extraordinary case isn't better known. Indeed, one true crime writer admitted Superior Universal Alignment was a cult even I was unfamiliar with, highlighting how underreported it remains. This lack of widespread attention means that the full horror of what happened in Altamira has not been seared into global consciousness the way other cult crimes have. For the families of the victims, this is an added tragedy. Their children's brutal deaths passed largely into obscurity on the world stage. Yet the macabre tale of this child-eater cult deserves to be remembered as a stark warning. It combines elements almost too extreme for fiction: a UFO prophetess, convincing respectable citizens to butcher innocent children in the jungle, secret black magic rites carried out under the cover of a doomsday religion, and a charismatic leader who managed to slip through the fingers of the law. The Altamira case lays bare how dangerous the mix of unhinged ideology and blind obedience can be. It shows that cult leaders armed with apocalyptic fervor can compel followers to commit unspeakable acts and then emerge comparatively unscathed. In the end, Valentina de Andrade escaped human justice, but the heinous crimes attributed to her sect have earned her a place in infamy. For those who hear this story now, the reaction is often one of astonishment. How could something so horrific, on such a scale, remain so little known? Perhaps it is because the events in Altamira are a nightmare we scarcely want to believe could be real. But they were real, all too real, for the boys who suffered and for their families who endure the grief. Telling the story of superior universal alignment today is not just an exercise in morbid curiosity. It is a way of honoring those victims and acknowledging the dark truths of human behavior. This cult's legacy is a haunting one, reminding us that under the right or wrong conditions, people can be driven to justify the most monstrous evil in the name of faith. It is a chapter of history that should never be forgotten, no matter how deeply it may unsettle and horrify us.